The emergency department was already drowning when Dr. Alan Mercer walked in. The fluorescent lights flickered as stretchers crowded the hallways, every monitor shrilling, every nurse sprinting. It was the kind of night where even the best doctor would have been tested, and Mercer loved these nights, not for the challenge, but for the control. "Move faster," he snapped at a nurse trying to start an IV on a patient. "What are you, new?" "Don't make me do your job for you." The nurse's hand trembled but steadied, jaw tightening. Everyone in the ER knew Mercer's voice, sharp as broken glass, loud enough to cut through chaos. He thrived on belittling people, keeping the team just afraid enough to obey. No one liked him, but no one dared cross him. I'd worked under him for 3 years, long enough to know the pattern. Every shift, he'd humiliate someone. An intern who didn't answer fast enough, a resident who stumbled through a case, a nurse who dared to ask a clarifying question. The patients saw a confident doctor. The staff saw a tyrant. That night, the storm inside the hospital mirrored the storm in him. "Where's the trauma bay prep?" he barked, slamming a chart down. "We're waiting on blood products," I said evenly, keeping my tone calm. "Then stop waiting and start thinking." "Do I have to teach you basic triage every single day?" A paramedic wheeled in another patient, and Mercer turned his wrath on them next. "What took you so long?" "If this man codes, it's on you." The medic's lips pressed tight. I could see the anger in his eyes, but he said nothing. Nobody did. We never did. That was Mercer's power. Fear. But fear doesn't last forever. It happened at 1:43 a.m. The time is burned into my memory. We were rushing through 3 new traumas at once: a stabbing, a drunk driver, and a construction accident. The air smelled of antiseptic, sweat, and blood. Mercer barked orders, his voice carrying across the chaos. "Push 2 units now," he shouted. "Get him to CT. Move!" He pivoted toward the next stretcher, and then stopped. For the first time, his voice faltered. His hand gripped the counter, his face drained of color. "Doctor?" a resident asked cautiously. Mercer blinked, swayed once, twice, then crumpled to the floor. His stethoscope clattered beside him. The room froze. For 3 long seconds, no one moved. Not because we didn't know what to do. We were trained for emergencies. But because it was Mercer, the man who'd spent years degrading us, dismissing us, humiliating us. The silence stretched. Then a nurse whispered, "Is he?" Another muttered, "Maybe karma finally showed up." I felt the same mix of shock and bitterness twist in my stomach. He was down. He needed us. And none of us wanted to be the first to move. Finally, a resident broke the spell. "We should, start CPR." But his voice was half-hearted, uncertain. "He's breathing," another nurse said, leaning just enough to look. "Shallow. Pulse is weak." We all stood there, the busiest ER in the city, frozen around our fallen leader. I heard the murmurs ripple. After everything he's done, he'd let us rot if it were the other way around. Remember when he called Carla incompetent in front of that patient's family? Or when he humiliated James until he cried? Every memory came flooding back. Mercer's cruelty wasn't just an inconvenience. It was trauma etched into us. And now, justice seemed to lie in not rushing to his side. But the oath inside me battled with the bitterness. "Someone get the crash cart," I finally said, my voice louder than I expected. All eyes turned to me. "You're actually going to help him?" one nurse asked, incredulous. "He's still a patient," I said through clenched teeth. "We don't get to choose who lives or dies." The resident hesitated, then grabbed the cart reluctantly. We moved Mercer to a stretcher. His face was slick with sweat, his chest rising unevenly. "BP's tanking," the resident muttered. Could be a cardiac event, I said. Get leads on him. As we worked, the bitterness didn't disappear. It colored everything. When I pressed pads to his chest, my hands were steady but cold. When the monitor beeped, one nurse muttered, "Shame it's not flat." No one cried. No one gasped in horror. No one pleaded for him to hold on. It was the quietest code I'd ever run. As compressions started, the whispers grew. "You think this changes anything?" Carla, the nurse he'd humiliated most often, whispered to me. "If he makes it, he'll still be the same bastard." I kept my eyes on the monitor. Maybe. But if he dies, we become the kind of people he made us. That's not who we are. "Easy for you to say," she snapped. "He ruined my evaluation last year. Said I wasn't fit for critical care." Another voice. "He almost cost me my residency." One mistake and he tore me apart in front of the board. The chest compressions went on. The beeping continued, but the resentment spilled like blood, raw and unchecked. And in that moment, I realized Mercer's collapse wasn't just a medical crisis. It was the release of years of pent-up fury. "Clear," the resident said, pressing the defibrillator. Mercer's body jolted. The line flickered, then steadied into an unsteady rhythm. "He's back in sinus," I said. Relief washed over me, though it was strange relief. Not joy, not gratitude, just obligation fulfilled. We stabilized him enough to transfer to ICU. As we wheeled him down the hall, the silence was heavy. Normally, staff rallied when saving one of our own. Not tonight. No one patted each other's backs. No one cheered. We just moved him quietly, as if ashamed of what we felt. Or didn't feel. 2 days later, a meeting was called. Administration wanted statements. They asked us to recount what happened, minute by minute. I told the truth, that Mercer collapsed, that he was pulseless, that we revived him. But I didn't mention the hesitation. None of us did. The silence in those first seconds remained our unspoken secret. After the meeting, I found Carla sitting in the break room. She stared at her coffee like it held answers. "You ever think," she murmured, "that maybe if we'd waited longer, just a little longer, everything would be better now?" I swallowed hard. I thought about it. But that's not who I want to be. She looked at me, eyes hollow. "Then who are we?" "The people who saved him, just so he can go back to tearing us apart?" I had no answer. Weeks passed. Mercer returned. Not as quickly as he wanted, but quicker than many hoped. When he walked back into the ER, cane in hand, eyes blazing with defiance, the room went silent. He smirked. "What, you thought I'd stay down?" "Not a chance." For a moment, it was like nothing had changed. He barked orders, criticized charts, rolled his eyes at nurses. But something was different, not in him, but in us. Because we'd seen him fall. We'd seen him weak, helpless, human. And we'd seen our own hesitation. We no longer feared him. And without fear, his cruelty lost its bite. One night, after he snapped at Carla again, she stood taller than I'd ever seen. "No, Dr. Mercer," she said firmly. "You don't get to talk to me like that anymore." He froze, stunned. No one had ever challenged him like that, not directly. I stepped forward. "She's right. We're here to work with you, not under you. If you can't respect that, you'll find yourself on the floor again. And maybe next time we won't be so quick." The words hung in the air. Not a threat, not exactly, but a reminder. Mercer's face darkened, but he didn't answer. And that silence was victory. Months later, I still think about that night. About the way we froze when he fell. About the whispers, the hesitation, the dark part of me that wanted to wait. But I also think about what came after. The way we stood taller. The way the fear broke. The way even Mercer seemed to realize he wasn't invincible anymore. He never became kind. He never became beloved. But he became cautious. And for us, that was enough. Sometimes it takes watching a monster fall to remember your own strength. And sometimes, the real collapse isn't the doctor's. It's the fear he built around him, crashing to the floor the moment he needed us most. The night shift in the emergency department had its own tempo. Phones rang in uneven bursts, monitors beeped in steady rhythms, and the scuff of shoes across tile carried a low, constant hum. The fluorescent lights were harsh, bouncing off every stainless steel surface and polished floor, making fatigue sharper, harder to ignore. I'd worked enough shifts to know when things were running smoothly and when something was off. That night, something was off. It started as a whisper of unease. The trauma bay smelled faintly different, less of antiseptic and more of alcohol. Not the sterile kind from an IV prep pad, but something heavier, sour, unmistakably wrong. At first, I thought it was a lingering scent from a patient who'd come in drunk. But as I passed near the attending physician's lounge, the odor grew stronger. That's when my gut told me this wasn't about a patient at all. Dr. Halverson was supposed to be covering trauma admissions. He had a reputation for brilliance, sharp diagnoses, lightning-fast surgical decisions, but also a reputation for volatility. I'd seen his temper flare more than once. Tonight, though, when I found him standing at the nurse's station, charts clutched in hand, the volatility had a different edge. His eyes were glassy, his pupils uneven. His words slurred slightly when he asked for the next patient's vitals. I kept my voice calm. We just had a motor vehicle collision roll in. 2 patients. Severe injuries. He squinted at me, his pen scratching the wrong line of the chart. The beeping monitors in trauma one picked up, one alarm after another, and my stomach tightened. Whatever was happening with him wasn't just fatigue. It was impairment. Dangerous impairment. I didn't have the luxury of panic. A teenage boy was on the gurney in Trauma 1, his chest rising unevenly, blood soaking the gauze at his side. Another patient screamed in the background, glass still embedded in her skin. The trauma team was waiting on leadership, waiting for the attending to take control. But the attending was swaying slightly on his feet. "Dr. Halverson," I said carefully, "we need to move fast." Airways compromised. He fumbled with his stethoscope, dropping it once before slinging it around his neck. Get me the..." His words cut into a mumble. He reached for the boy's chart, smearing a pen line across the paper instead of writing an order. That was the moment the fear hardened into certainty. He was drunk, on the job, with patients' lives in his hands. I stepped forward, catching the eye of the respiratory therapist. "Start bagging him." Prep for intubation. Now my voice carried a sharp authority I hadn't planned, but the room needed direction. I motioned subtly to another nurse to fetch the charge nurse, and maybe security, without saying it aloud. Halverson blinked at me, confused. He reached for the laryngoscope, nearly knocking it onto the floor. His hand shook as he tried to lift it. I couldn't let him near that airway. "Doctor, I need you to step aside," I said firmly, moving between him and the patient. His eyes narrowed. For a second, I thought he might lash out. Instead, he slurred, "You don't give orders." "I do." But the team was already moving without him, following my lead. Bagging continued. Suction whirred, and the RT prepared for the tube. My heart hammered. Every action had to look calm, precise, professional, even though adrenaline burned in my veins. I slid the blade into the boy's mouth, guided by muscle memory and years of backup training, calling for the tube. The RT passed it. We secured it. Breath sounds returned equal. Monitors steadied. The boy lived because we acted without the attending. Halverson stumbled backward, clutching the counter for balance. His face flushed crimson. "I had it," he muttered, but his voice cracked. The charge nurse arrived, her eyes flicking from me to him, taking in the scene. I gave her a slight nod. She understood. She touched her radio, murmuring a call for hospital security. Meanwhile, the second trauma patient screamed as glass was extracted from her thigh. I guided a junior nurse through wound irrigation, checked vitals, and issued orders as steadily as I could. Every second, I was aware of him, still there, swaying, staring, caught between anger and collapse. The smell of alcohol clung to the air around him, undeniable now. Security entered quietly, 2 officers in dark uniforms. They approached from the side, careful not to escalate. "Doctor," one said evenly, "we need to have a word." Halverson's jaw clenched. "I'm in the middle of—" He gestured vaguely toward the trauma bay, but the team wasn't looking at him anymore. They were following me. The shift in power was visible. Unspoken. One officer stepped closer. "Sir, please come with us." He shoved the chart at the counter, papers scattering, and stormed toward the exit. His steps faltered, nearly sending him into a wall, but the officers guided him firmly out. The automatic doors closed behind them, sealing him from the chaos he had abandoned. For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then monitors beeped, patients groaned, and the rhythm of the ER resumed. I drew in a long breath and went back to work, pushing the incident to the edge of my mind until the patients were stable. Hours later, when the adrenaline faded, the reality settled in. I filed an incident report, hands shaking as I described the smell, the slurred speech, the near disaster. My words would go to administration, to the medical board, maybe to court. But beneath the paperwork, the truth burned. I had stopped him. Not because I wanted to, not because I sought leadership, but because lives demanded it. Patients trusted us with their survival, and nothing could excuse a betrayal that deep. The rest of the night was a blur of sutures, medication charts, and blood draws. But every time I walked past the attending's office, empty now, the air felt charged. I wondered how long he'd been hiding it. I wondered how many close calls had gone unnoticed. At dawn, when I finally stepped out into the cool air, exhaustion pulled at me, but something else steadied me too. A line had been drawn, sharp and irreversible. And I knew I'd never forget the night I had to stop a doctor, not just for my patients, but for the integrity of the entire profession. The emergency department never really slept. Even in the slowest hours, there was always the rustle of bedsheets, the beep of monitors, the clatter of carts rolling across tile. I'd grown used to that rhythm after 6 years of working nights, but one rhythm I never got used to was the sound of Dr. Collins' heels clicking down the hall. She was brilliant, no one denied that. She could diagnose things other people overlooked, finish a trauma resuscitation in record time, and carry herself like she owned the building. But brilliance came with venom. To her, nurses were never good enough. Every shift was filled with sharp words, rolled eyes, and muttered insults. She especially loved targeting me. Maybe it was because I never cowered. When she snapped, I snapped back, though quietly, when patients couldn't hear. She hated being questioned. She hated not being worshipped. And I hated the way she made every shift feel like walking on glass. I told myself to endure. Nurses always endure. But endurance has its limits. That night started like 100 others. Ambulances offloaded patients with chest pains, broken arms, overdoses. The air was tense but manageable. I was triaging a young woman with abdominal pain when I heard it. The familiar staccato of Collins's heels echoing like gunfire against linoleum. Only this time, something was different. She came in late. That was unusual. She prided herself on punctuality, always criticizing anyone else who arrived even a minute past their time. Tonight, she stumbled into the nurse's station with a faint sway in her step. Her lipstick was smudged. Her hair hung in limp strands instead of its usual tight bun. And the smell hit us before she spoke. Stale alcohol, seeping through perfume. "Where's the board?" she muttered, eyes half-lidded. The charge nurse froze, then pointed reluctantly at the assignment board. Collins squinted, scribbled something illegible, and barked, "Fine. Just don't stand around." Move, my stomach tightened. I'd seen hungover colleagues before. Nurses sometimes drag themselves in after rough nights out. But never Collins. She worshipped control, her image, her dominance. To see her undone like this was jarring and dangerous. She was assigned to Trauma 2, where a car crash victim was being prepped for imaging. The patient moaned as we rolled him in, and I caught Collins yawning mid-order. "Get me. She waved vaguely toward the supply cart. "That thing. The scan die." Her words were slurred. The residents glanced at each other nervously. I stepped in, pulling the IV kit myself, guiding them through setup while Collins leaned on the counter like she might collapse. Something inside me snapped then. Weeks, months, years of enduring her cruelty. All the times she called me incompetent. All the nights she mocked nurses in front of patients. It boiled up in the sight of her, barely able to function, and still expecting us to cover her failure. This wasn't just arrogance anymore. This was danger. By midnight, Collins had snapped at 3 nurses, misread 2 charts, and nearly ordered a double dose of medication for a child with asthma. I intercepted it just in time, fixing her mistake under the guise of double-checking. But I couldn't keep patching holes in a sinking ship. Not tonight. She cornered me near the medroom, her breath sour with vodka masked by mints. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she hissed. "Always fixing things. Always acting like you're in charge. I think you're unfit to work tonight," I said evenly. My heart raced, but I didn't flinch. Her eyes narrowed, but I saw the wobble in her focus. "Watch yourself. I could ruin you." That was the old Collins, the bully, the tyrant, but she didn't scare me anymore. Not after what I'd seen tonight. Not after realizing she could ruin patients, not just staff. I left her fuming, went straight to the charge nurse, and laid it out plain. Collins was impaired. Not tired, not stressed, impaired. The charge nurse paled, whispering that reporting and attending was career suicide. Doctors had power. Nurses didn't. But then she glanced toward Trauma 2, where Collins was barking incoherent orders at a terrified intern, and her hesitation crumbled. She nodded. "Do it. File the report. I'll back you." Collins's downfall came faster than I expected. Security was discreet, but whispers spread quick. Administration called in. Risk management was alerted. A quiet investigation became a loud intervention. We were in Trauma 2 when it happened. Collins leaned against the bed, trying to read a monitor, when 2 administrators and a hospital security officer walked in. "Dr. Collins," one said calmly, "we need to speak with you." She scoffed. "Can't you see I'm working?" "Get out!" The administrator's voice sharpened. "Now." The room froze. Residents stared. Nurses held their breath. Collins laughed, high-pitched, brittle, and staggered toward the door. "This is ridiculous. I'm fine. I've been running this ER better than anyone else." But when she brushed past the administrator, her shoulder clipped the doorframe. The stumble spoke louder than anything I could have written in my report. The administrator's face was grim. "You're relieved of duty effective immediately." Collins spun, eyes wild. "You can't—" But the words fell flat. Everyone had seen enough. The nurses she tormented, the interns she berated, the patients she endangered. All of us bore witness. For once, she had no power. Security guided her out. She didn't fight, not really. Just muttered curses under her breath, her heels dragging now instead of clicking. The ER exhaled as one. The storm had passed. Afterward, the department buzzed with rumors. Some said she'd been drinking for weeks. Others whispered about an ugly divorce, debts, secret breakdowns. I didn't care about the gossip. What mattered was this. She was gone. Her cases were reassigned. Her name scrubbed from the board. For the first time in months, the air in the ER felt lighter. Nurses moved freely without bracing for attacks. Interns asked questions without fear of ridicule. Administration called me in for a statement. I told the truth, her slurred words, the smell of alcohol, the mistakes I corrected. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. Reality was damning enough. Weeks later, word came down officially. Dr. Collins's license was suspended pending investigation. She wouldn't be back. The night she left, I walked out of the hospital into the quiet dawn. The air smelled of rain, fresh and clean. For once, I didn't dread the next shift. I thought of all the nurses she'd cut down, all the scars her words had left. Some of them would never forgive her. But for me, there was a strange peace. Not triumph, exactly, but relief. I hadn't set out to take her down. I just wanted my patients safe. But in the end, standing up for them meant standing up for myself, too.